The Sony A7 IV might be coming out later this year. And when that comes out, hopefully, it's at a good price point. Rumor is that it might not be at a good price point, which would be interesting to see. That means you might be able to grab the Sony A7 IV for a deal on the used market, because when a new camera comes out, usually you can grab these for a deal on the used market. The new market, it'll probably stay about the same. This might drop some, but Sony also just raised their prices on a lot of these. $300-400 for this camera that's 4 years old, or the A7S III that's 5 years old and definitely needs a little bit of revamping to add some of the newer Sony features like the stack sensor, the better AI autofocus, and the like. But the question is, if you find these on the used market, or you find a deal on this, should you get it even though it's 4 years old? The answer to that's yes, obviously. In my opinion, any camera that's come out from basically 2020 and onward is gonna be very good. Now, that's not every camera, but a majority of them are gonna be great. Even if you go all the way back to the Sony A7 III, that was before this A7 IV, that one is still really, really good and nice to use. Honestly, I bought the A7 III 4 years after it came out, and then I bought this 2 years after it came out. I remember exactly when I bought it. It was right before I went on a trip to Prague, and I was very excited to take it because it has this swivel screen that twists all the way around, and the A7 III only had the tilt screen. 4 years later, the specs on this thing still hold up because it's got a 33 megapixel sensor. It's got an ISO from 100 to 51,200. It's got that 5-axis IBIS, and it does 10 frames per second when you're shooting, or 6 frames per second in uncompressed RAW. The autofocus on this camera is absolutely phenomenal. It also has 3 different subjects you can choose from for the autofocus. So you have a human, you also have birds, and you have animals. So depending on what you're gonna be shooting that day, you can change what the autofocus is gonna be looking for. What's really cool is it has this eye autofocus. So it's gonna try to focus on their eyes for that image so you can get that face nice and sharp. It's also water resistant. You can see in these images really quick of all the snow that was landing on it from when I was in Prague. You can see there was a lot of snow around and it was getting covered in snow, and never once did I have any malfunctions or anything like that. So the water resistance on this camera works very well. But if you're more worried about the video side of this thing, now hear me out. The reason this is a huge upgrade from the Sony A7 III is because this shoots in 10-bit while the A7 III only does 8-bit. It also has S-Log 3, and there is no limit on the 4K recording. So it's not gonna time out after about 30 minutes like a lot of cameras do. But with that no recording limit, the thing you might wanna keep an eye on with this screen is the possibility of it overheating, because you could get a warning if it starts to overheat. Now, if you take it off your camera like I did, it's a less chance of it overheating because the screen gets pretty hot, and if you leave it on there, that whole thing's just gonna heat up and could cause you an issue with overheating. I've only had it overheat on me twice in the 2 years I have owned this. And both of those are because I live in South Carolina, where it's like 100 degrees every single day in the summer. And one was shooting 24 frames a second, one was shooting at 60 frames a second. And I had already been recording for a while. So just keep that in mind, that that could happen to you. There's a couple video specs I forgot to mention. It does 24 frames a second. It does 25 frames a second. It does 30 frames a second in 4K via 7K oversampling. And you can also have it in the slow and quick mode do 120 frames a second, but that's gonna be full HD, not 4K. But for me, the biggest letdown of this camera is on the video side, actually. Because for photos, I absolutely love it. But videos, this is the part that gets me. I've mentioned all the important frame rates but one, and that's 60 frames per second. Most of us love shooting 60 frames a second just so that way we can slow subjects down when we need to. Whether it's an animal running across us, whether you're shooting a wedding and you want to be able to slow down the moment the bride walks down the aisle, or anything like that. You know how important 60 frames a second can be. Can it be overused, overplayed? Absolutely. But it's also just a great feature to have, and this does have 60 frames a second, but it's cropped in at a 1.5 times factor. So while this can come in handy because it could turn your 24-70 into a 36-105, which is nice if you need that extra reach. It also does have that crop sensor mode you can shoot in. So if you do need that extra reach when you're taking photos, you get it. The issue is when you're doing something like reviews like I do, This is a 35 1.4. And if I'm doing a review on this lens and I decide I want to use 60 frames a second to show my subject walking by, and I want to slow it down or anything like that just to kind of give it a different look, it basically turns my 35 into a 52.5 roughly. And the problem with this is then I don't get to show my lens for actually what it is. I basically have to not use 60 frames a second and being able to slow the footage down, which is okay, but I'd rather it be able to slow that footage down at 60 frames a second. I can have a great subject, whether it's a person, a landscape, or some type of architecture, and I look at it and I think that's the shot. That is what I want, right? That's what I want my image to look like. But then I turn it to 60 frames a second and then it crops in and it doesn't look the same anymore. That just becomes annoying. I just wish it was uncropped, but I also get why, because we can't have the best in all these cameras, especially at a $2,500 price point. But here's the thing, there's a way around it. You can turn it off 4K and shoot in 1080p. Not the greatest way to do it, in my opinion, because the image does look pretty soft when you're doing that, but that is the workaround if you need to. Just keep that in mind. Now, it really depends on what you're doing and what you're shooting. If you are a hybrid shooter, this camera, absolutely fantastic. But like I said, maybe you wait a few months because the price point on these might drop a little bit. Once that A7 IV is announced, people are gonna be looking at that, looking at those specs and upgrading from that. So you might be able to get one of these on a deal since Sony just raised their prices. But that's all I got. This wasn't really an in-depth video about this camera because there's a billion of them out there already because this camera's so old. But if you'd like to see me do one, absolutely drop that down below and tell me, hey, do a full review on this thing, and I'll do it because I've got some amazing photos that I've taken with this thing over the last few years that I'd love to show off. But if you didn't like this video because you thought it was gonna be a whole review on this camera, drop it down in the comments, hit that thumbs down button. That way I kind of know what content to create and what content to steer away from. But at the end of the day, great camera. There's some great lenses in this lineup, and those great third-party Sony lenses are fantastic as well. But that's all I got for you. God bless. I'll see y'all in the next one.